Welcome to episode one of Lights and Dice. This is the podcast where we dive into all things casinos, travel, and everything that comes with it. From the high stakes action on the gaming floor to the best places to stay, eat, and play, we bring our experiences and insight to the world of gambling and casino travel. Whether it's the bright lights of Vegas, the quirks of casinos around the world, or the strategy behind the games, we've got plenty to talk about. So let's get into it. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing good. This is kind of crazy because we are in completely different parts of the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, more importantly, based off of when I had to wake up, different sides of time, too, so it's noticeable.
And before we get into today's sort of main topic, I should probably introduce myself and you as well. So if you recognize my voice, you might know me from my work Travel Zork on Zorkcast. I've been coming to Vegas for years from the UK, and over time I feel like I've seen it all. Big wins, bad beats, crazy experiences, and some maybe quite questionable decisions. And that brings me to Chris.
The questionable decision part.
Yeah. Chris isn't just my co-host though, right? He's also my casino host, and that's how we met. And over time we've had loads of conversations about the ins and outs of the industry.
Yeah, multiple different kinds of hosts, co-host, casino host, host. I don't know, lots of hosts.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. But for a lot of people though, the role of a casino host is a bit of a mystery. So I thought, for episode one, why don't we pull back the curtain, so to speak? What does a casino host actually do? How do they decide who gets comps? What are some of the wildest stories from behind the scenes? That kind of stuff. What do you think?
Sure, sounds good to me.
So I don't know if you want to give some more detail around where you work, or if you want to keep that kind of out of the podcast. I kind of leave that up to you. So did you want to share that, or?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be for full transparency. I am an executive casino host at Circa. The D and Golden Gate are our sister properties as well. My point of co-hosting the podcast isn't to promote that, so to say. If that comes out of it, then cool. I'm happy to speak on our behalf about stuff. But I've also been around the industry for quite a while, so I think we can talk on all engines of that. But like I said, just for full transparency, that is where I work. The legal stuff, my opinions don't necessarily reflect that of my employer, and vice versa. But yeah, I mean, so that's kind of the angle where we're coming from. At least that's my background.
All right. Well, for people listening that maybe have no idea what a casino host is, let's start with the basics. You're a casino host in Las Vegas. What does that mean? What's the day-to-day like?
Well, the day-to-day kind of changes day-to-day all the time. It's kind of hard to say that there's a specific day-to-day. The way I loosely describe my job to people is that I'm kind of the liaison between the marketing department and the player. Will I interact with everybody? I mean, a lot of my day-to-day ends up at the bar on property or whatever, just talking to people who are there. I mean, it's a good way to get to know people, and I think that the personal touch really helps people's perspective of a business. It makes it less businessy, I guess. So yeah, mostly overall, my job is to represent a player who's qualified for my services for the most part.
So, and a lot of people sort of, I think, hear casino host online, on message boards, in YouTube videos, whatever, and they picture sort of someone who's just there handing out comps left and right. But there's obviously more to it than that, right? So what's the process or what's the secret formula for deciding who gets what? How do you decide on who gets what?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny when you see online, the perception of a casino host is just so polar. It's the people who don't have it, it's always the ever elusive, oh, well, I get contacted by a casino host ever. And then the people who are just, big players and stuff like that, they're probably actually annoyed that I'm coming to talk to them at a table or something like that. Go away, I'm trying to play craps.
Yeah, so people always want one, don't they? They always want something they don't have, and sometimes maybe it's better not to have a casino host.
Sometimes, I mean, a lot of it comes down to what your level of play is, not even necessarily as to whether or not it's an amenity that you deserve, it's whether or not it's an amenity that you can actually make use of. Like you mentioned, the comp process, a lot of it's based off of how long you play. So, I mean, to be blunt, now that we're on the podcast, maybe I would talk to somebody in a casino a little bit differently. A lot of it's based off a theoretical standpoint. So, I mean, as we know, just about every game in the casino has somewhat of an advantage towards the casino. So based off of your time played on that machine, game, buy-in, average bet, that kind of stuff, there's a formula that determines your average theoretical loss. So we would make comping decisions based on that. So I mean, if you're just playing a video poker machine to get the free beers, you already got comp free beers. Like, you're there. Other than that, you're talking slot machines. Like, the longer you play, you're going to increase your theoretical worth, and that's what we're willing to comp based off of. So hopefully you win on top of that. It's not based off of your loss per se.
This is like the theoretical loss. So this is the amount the casino would expect you to lose during whatever length of session you play, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, say you're betting $100 a hand on blackjack for 2 hours. Your theoretical loss is probably about $100 based off of the house edge on blackjack not being very high, and hands per hour, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's table game's a little bit different because it's so volatile. Like, you playing $100 a hand, you could obviously lose $5,000 in that 2 hours. You could also win $5,000, $10,000 in those 2 hours, and then you look at it like, oh, well, my theoretical loss was only $100. Like, yeah, I mean, in the long term, that's just how it works out.
So would you say that the majority of players that qualify for a host, and I know this is not necessarily like every player, but the majority, let's say, are probably slot players or table players?
I would say it's a pretty even mix.
Interesting.
Slot players are a little bit easier to work with and forecast, like, their overall play and stuff like that, because it's just so run by computers now. Where obviously back in the day, I mean, everything was table games, everything was paper comps, everything was, that's back when a lot of the players who asked for comps like to mention, back in the day, people would buy steak dinners for us just to show up, which isn't the case anymore.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I mean, I would say it's an even mix.
This is kind of like back in the day, right? Or people would like go to a table and buy in big because then they think that representing them as a bigger player than they are.
Yeah.
Actually maybe not be playing that much, take that money back out, and then in the sense of hoping to get comps.
Yeah, we're on to you. We get it. We've seen all the tricks.
Yeah, but people, I'm assuming people still try, right?
Yeah, of course. Well, and a lot of people will do it too just because it looks like they're a baller to other players on the table too. Like, oh, if I buy in $5,000, everyone's like, oh, big buy-in over here, and then you end up betting $25 a hand or something. Like,
yeah. So you're only ever actually playing with like $500 of your buy-in or whatever.
Yeah, you were never going to lose the whole bankroll that you brought to the table.
Yeah, and so like so you mentioned length of play, and this is something that I find interesting. So let's talk about slots for a minute. So if you're a slot player, is it better from your perspective for a slot player to play, say, 10 hours at $3 a spin than to play a couple of hours at $25 a spin?
It really depends on what you're playing, as far as, like, I don't know, I guess I'm trying to figure out the way to describe it here. It really depends on kind of what you're playing. I mean, yeah, obviously length of time on a game is nice because it also shows that you're committed. Like, you're taking it seriously being here and stuff. Like, you're a real player. Whereas you could just be on a $25 game for an hour or something like that on slot machines. I mean, it's $25 per spin.
Yeah.
And just be like, oh, okay, well, I've got like $500 in my pocket. We're just going to see where it goes. Whereas someone who's going to be on a lower denomination machine for a longer period of time is committed to playing. Like, this is a gambling session for me, not just like, hey, here's a machine that looks cool. I wonder if we hit the Wheel of Fortune wheel this time, kind of thing.
So like I remember seeing online the people that would go and take a couple of $100 and just try $100 spin Wheel of Fortune and hope they hit. And that's not necessarily the play you're looking for.
No. I mean, ultimately it comes into coin in, which is the amount that's cycled through the machine, not necessarily, like, you could put in $100, that doesn't necessarily mean you have $100 coin in. You could keep winning, that $100 can last you a while. Like, I've made $20 on a video poker machine get me $1,000 in coin in before, just because you keep bouncing around until you finally either decide to stop or you end up losing, in my case, $20. But it looks like you cycled 1,000 through. So if you're getting the same coin in, that's kind of what I mean. It doesn't necessarily matter on what machine or on what method it is. It comes out kind of the same on paper. But yeah, obviously any host is going to prefer somebody who's going to make more of a session, more of like a experience out of their gaming than just kind of quickly hit and run kind of thing.
Yeah, and the cynic in me thinks to myself, well, also the casino wants you to play a machine for longer because then they got more chance of winning, right? But I guess the
Well,
player has as much chance of winning.
yeah, I mean it's the house edge that comes into effect, right? It's just the
Yeah.
law of averages. The longer you're going to play, the more likely it is that it's going to work out in the casino's favor. But you can always make the argument that if you haven't hit something big yet, the more likely you might be to hit it in the future, right? Or as you move forward, like maybe you're gonna hit a four of a kind at some point on video poker. Just hopefully you're on the right side of the fence when you get it, kind of thing, instead of just needing to hit four aces with a kicker to get your bankroll back. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean a lot of it comes down to that. But yeah, sure. I mean the longer you're playing, the more beneficial it is for a casino.
yeah, and this is, I guess, why, quite often a casino host will be super happy if you have a winning trip because that means you're going to come back and the casino's probably going to win it at some point.
Yeah, it's true, and then plus it gives you a good taste in your mouth from our property. If you win a whole bunch here this trip, you're more likely to come back next trip, and then the law of averages comes back into play. But a lot of people think like casino hosts are paid off commission, which used to be the case a lot more often than it is now. Not a lot of people are commissioned anymore. So quite frankly, a casino host probably doesn't really care if you win or lose from like a business standpoint. So it's more a relationship that, like, yeah, it's cooler for me if you win some money because you're having a better time rather than sending me a text saying, "Hey, Chris, I lost everything and whatever. Thanks for the free room, I guess."
Yeah, this
So
sucks.
this way, yeah, exactly. I'd rather you had a good time. I'd rather you got a chance to like enjoy what you did and still take advantage of the amenities. However, I mean, especially when table games that comes into play, an actual loss situation, like we're able to comp you based off actual loss separately from theoretical loss, and that really only comes into effect on table games because, like I mentioned earlier, like you can be betting $100 a hand on table games and really easily win or lose a lot, like really quickly. Like you could lose $5,000 on a blackjack game a lot sooner than you're going to reach 5,000 in theoretical, for sure. So in that particular case, like we're not going to comp you based off of your theoretical loss of like 200 or something at that point. We're going to comp you based off your actual loss, which is going to work out better for you.
So you're kind of being kind of reasonable there, right? Because you could have a player who's a great player comes in and just has a really bad run and loses everything within the first few hours of being there on the tables.
Yeah, you could realistically. I mean, we in the industry call that quick loss.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'd comp you based off of quick loss in that perspective.
Interesting. Okay, so I also want to go back a little bit here because you mentioned commission and commission not really being a thing anymore. I think that's quite interesting because I think a lot of people still think that casino hosts are paid based on commission. So how does that work nowadays?
I will start by saying that some people still are. So if
Yeah.
you're in
Okay.
a contract that was already pre-negotiated that way, or some properties do still give some element of commission, it's usually based off of theoretical loss. It
Mm.
depends on the industry too, because different markets have different rules on that. These days, though, most of the commissioned hosts, if you even really want to refer to them specifically as a casino host, are all independent, and that's just the way that they
Yeah.
generate people from external business to a property that they don't work at. So if it's just, like, hey, I've got this big player who wants to give your place a try, but also I'm going to need a little kickback off of his play for bringing him your way, those are kind of the ones who get commissioned these days. Although, I mean, I'm sure some property ones do, but it's like any business or any sales job where like you can get bonuses based off overall performance. Sometimes it's based off the performance of the team. Sometimes, but it's not directly related to player ABC comes in, loses $10,000. I can expect to have this much as a result. It's definitely not related to that. So your average host really isn't going to care if you win or lose from a financial standpoint.
And that's like you said, I guess, and this is maybe is partly casinos changing their perspectives and thinking about the longer term. Players, if they win, they're going to want to come back. Whereas if you lose really bad somewhere, you might think, well, that's an unlucky casino for me. Now I know that's not how it works, right? It's all random number generators or whatever. But people think that, right? I'm never going to go to Planet Hollywood because I always lose there. So you definitely want people to come out on top rather than lose, so you can just get a one-time big commission payout or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, we like I said, we don't really have a whole lot of commission anymore, anyways. So
Yeah. And out of interest, you may not be able to say, but does Circa have independent hosts as well, or is it just you guys, like on employed by Circa, so to speak?
from an overall standpoint, I would just say it's just employees of Circa for the most
Yeah,
part. Have
interesting.
we dealt with independent hosts in the past? Yes. Would we consider maybe on a case by case basis, possibly,
Yeah,
especially when the property Circa opened? So when we went from just having the D in Golden Gate and then opening Circa, we obviously we're trying to bring in a little bit more new business. I mean, Circa really did bring a whole new traffic to downtown to Fremont Street, because a
yeah,
lot of the people I talked to when they came in, they're like, Chris, this place is great. We never really even had an opinion on Fremont Street because we always were just strip people. We never even had a reason to come downtown. We just never even wanted to come see. So we didn't even know if the Golden Nugget was good. We didn't know if the D was something we wanted to check out. We didn't know if we liked the Plaza, downtown Grand, any of those places, because they just simply wouldn't come down here. And a place like Circa brought them in the first place. And there's been statistics about Fremont Street because everything's just so tightly knit, and we all work together pretty closely, all the casinos in Fremont, that the average person who visits our properties usually goes to 3 properties while they're here. So it benefits all of us if one thing is what draws a customer who wouldn't have otherwise considered themselves a downtown customer, or what people say, because it benefits everybody. We all get to join in on it.
yeah. I've heard that before. I've heard that. I feel like I'm name dropping the competition here, but it's not competition in terms of like the Plaza podcast. They've talked about this on there, how it's like a one big family downtown. It's not really seen as like, although there obviously they are competitors, but it's not kind of seen that way.
Yeah, a lot different from the Strip, whereas the Strip just literally doesn't want you to leave the front door because they know that you're going somewhere else. I mean, I guess from like an MGM or a Caesars standpoint, you're somewhere else is reasonably likely to still be something that they own. But either way,
Yeah,
why would you take the risk? Like, they'd rather you just stay there. And I used to work at MGM, at an MGM property, and some of our hosts there wouldn't even comp at other MGM properties just because they didn't want you to leave. So it's kind of a different dynamic here.
yeah. So you could end up with almost like competing amongst hosts competing within the same company because they're based at different properties.
Yeah. Yeah, you have hosts that are just literally trying to steal a host from like MGM Grand and take them over to Aria. I don't know, for example. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of weird. It's like we're technically part of the team here, but only when it's convenient.
All right. So let's talk about machines at this point. So I want to focus on sort of slot machines, video poker machines. Uh, do you guys differentiate between the two when you look at play?
Looking at overall play, not quite as much. Based off of earning points, like the stuff that your card automatically generates, that
Yeah.
doesn't really have much to do with the host. It's more the marketing department and database that associates that stuff. You would earn points differently on video poker versus slots, just because there's different hold levels on the machines. So you might earn points at a slower rate on video poker, but when you're looking just purely at play from a host standpoint, it would all come out the same. Like, you're playing a machine, you have X amount of theoretical loss, you have X amount of actual loss or win, and we go from there.
Yeah, because I think it's MGM now that will comp based on the theoretical hold of the machine. I think I'm right
Yeah.
in saying that. Is that so? That's not necessarily the case for you guys, or is that becoming more of a thing? Because we're in like a data-driven world now, right? Everything is tracked via your player's card, so you guys can know exactly what the hold is on the machine the player is playing. I presume. I mean, if MGM are doing it, you guys, I presume, can do that too. So,
Yes, I mean, that's like you said. That's more of like a database standpoint of things. Like, are there people who
yeah,
know those specific informations relative to the current situation of the machine? Yes, but the average person you're going to deal with probably doesn't even know. Like, you could
yeah.
point out a machine. There's no way I could tell you what the hold percentage on that is just by looking at it. It's just not something that a host is really going to know.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think that people forget that. I mean, we're doing a podcast about casinos in Vegas. There are people online that are listening to this podcast. They're probably a bit more clued up. But your average person who's just coming in for a great weekend, they're not necessarily even thinking about that. They just want to play the machines they like. They want to play the machine with the biggest fat pig or whatever, and they're just happy doing that. They're not second guessing what the holds are. Whereas more savvy players might be thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have a really long session on video poker because I can find a really good pay table and I know I'm going to rack up a load of comps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's definitely the case. And plus, most of the time you're playing video poker, it's a bar top too. Like, could you get a standalone machine? Absolutely, if that's your thing. But I feel like video poker tends to be more of like at the presence of bartenders kind of thing. So the added benefit too is that you have quick drink service. You get to socialize with people if you're that kind of person, that kind of thing. So that goes into effect also. But I think you're for that reason, video poker probably on average comps more just because you're getting more access to drinks.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think about the drinks. I don't think about that side. Everything.
Nobody ever does think about drinks, and the reality is, like, chances are the average guest is overcomp just because you got free drinks when you really think about it. Because we sell those drinks for, like, say a beer, it's like $8. If you're talking a percentage of theoretical, right? Like, say $10 to make the math simple. I mean, yeah, like, your average play session probably isn't even going to warrant your beer. And yet, if you're there for a couple hours, you're getting hammered. So,
I would argue though that you guys like sell the beer for that, but you're not buying it for that.
So no, obviously our cost level is different. Yeah. Sure, and then it's a cost versus reward kind of thing, or potential return.
Yeah,
but it's like rooms too. Like a room doesn't cost us what we're going to sell it for, but it's worth what we're going to sell it for. So if we're putting a player in there instead of a retail person, are we going to get the same kind of return value as a person who would have just straight up front just paid us $200 for that room night? So it is kind of, does it cost us that much? No, on one end, but the opportunity cost is definitely worth something on that side of thing. Maybe with a drink it's a little bit different because we don't really need to factor in the opportunity cost of your beer or something like that, because we'll move it if we move it, or we'll move it when we move it. But we have a finite amount of rooms, so the opportunity cost definitely matters, especially when you're talking like New Year's Eve or something where hotels can sell it for 3 times the normal price. Now you got to have 3 times the player to go in to make it make sense.
Yeah, and we've all been there as well, where we've like been playing a machine and we thought, well, I'll just have one more drink. I'll keep playing until I get one more drink, and then realize we've put another $30-40 through, and the drink is a beer.
Yeah, expensive beers.
Yeah. All right, so you mentioned rooms. I'm jumping around a bit here, but you sort of say things and I'm thinking of questions as I go. So we're thinking about rooms. So you mentioned the room might be sold for $200 or whatever. How does that work in terms of the comp value of the room? Does the casino assign a value to the room? And does a player then have to almost like play off that room, i.e. play enough before they can start earning additional comps on top of the room?
Ultimately, yes, and it depends business to business as to how they're going to particularly evaluate that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, in most of the places I've worked, there's assigned a comp value, like the comp rate, basically, which some places either have fixed, and then they'll send out at the start of every year, like, here's the schedule of the days it's not going to be that fixed rate. And usually it's lower on the midweek, like Sunday through Thursday, and then it's higher on Friday, Saturday, just because of demand. But then they'll come out with like, okay, yeah, but during March Madness, it's going to be a higher comp rate automatically because we know it's going to be more expensive during New Year's, same kind of thing, like Super Bowl, regardless. So yeah, like there's just a fixed rate sometimes. Sometimes it's a fixed percentage. So it's like if the room's retailing for $100, the comp is, $70 or something like that. And in that case, it kind of changes your perception a bit as a host as to day to day whether or not the person's worth the comp, whereas ahead of time if there's a fixed comp rate.
Yeah, because I presume that's how it works when I don't know, if you log into your MGM rewards account and you have comp rooms midweek but you don't at the weekend, is because the comp value of the room is higher at the weekend or whatever.
Yeah, well, and honestly sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes the room costs me more than it would have cost you, not that you would notice because it's getting comp for you either way. But you could have bought it for $50 and I'm paying $100 just because it's the comp rate. Sometimes that happens that way.
Interesting. So that would imply almost that it's better for you guys if it was a percentage of whatever the rate was.
Ultimately, I would prefer just the standard, just because then you automatically know. Like this person, like based off of their overall play, like say they have a 400 average daily theoretical loss, which we kind of talked about is, you factor the average of the average, and that's, what we can expect out of you for a day. say that if they're a 400 ADT, average daily theoretical ADT player, then we know, okay, they qualify for a comp room midweek for sure, weekends most of the time, unless it's like March Madness or it's New Year's or something that we really got to consider, stuff like that.
And this is kind of based on your prior play, right? Because you don't know what someone's going to do. Someone could come in and take the comp room and barely play.
Yeah, I mean that definitely happens. We Most hosts tend to have enough of a relationship with other hosts and competing properties, well enough to at least be able to share, like, hey, this guy says that he plays at Venetian. Can you tell me if he had plays to the level that he says he does at Venetian? And if you're close enough with somebody, they're going to tell you that. Maybe if it's their player, they're going to be like, well, it's my player, man, so respectfully, I don't want to tell you.
Yeah.
And that's fair, too. But at that point, you know that, all right, if they're hosted by a guy I know, at least he's bothering to deal with them, too. So that probably tells me something also.
Yeah, and if he's that worried about you inquiring about the player, then that tells you something in itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of the time they'll tell you straight up, like, here's what you can expect out of this guy, girl, based on their play with us. And, I mean, then at that point, you're taking a shot, kind of.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get burned, because sometimes they still just they basically wanted to double down on an offer or something like that, or they were only getting 3 nights comp at New York, and wanted to stay for 5 in Las Vegas, so they just told you the play they were going to give to New York, and got the 2 nights out of you, and then, maybe they're never coming back, who knows. But that's also our time to try and woo those people, too, right? Like, it's all about service. That's what the competition is. So would I necessarily say it's a failure to someone who planned on doing that in the first place? No. But it's a shot. Like, anytime someone walks in the door, you have a shot at earning their business. So they gave you a chance, at least.
That's a very perceptive way to look at it, because I think I would struggle with that. I would be like, damn it, I'm gonna have to like get revenge on this dude.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you take it kind of personal, because it's just like, all right, man, like, I gave you this chance, and like, you just basically told me to fuck off. But
now you made me look bad.
I mean, yeah, well, it is kind of like that too, because we all have bosses we got to report to sometimes. So sometimes it's like, hey, Chris, why did you do this?
Yeah, why did you comp this dude?
Yeah, he came in here and just played like $12 and left. Sometimes you never know.
So, like, because I always hear people sort of have these. You see these stories online, but I've never actually heard of. For example, someone doing this and then the casino being like, right, well, we're going to charge you for the room. Does that happen? Or realistically,
I've definitely heard it happen.
Not.
I've heard it happen before. I know hosts that do that. It's probably not something that I would do. I don't think it's necessarily what the average host would do. I think they would just chalk it up as a loss.
Yeah.
Like, if they just took a chance on you and said, okay, like, we're out $500 worth of room, and it obviously wasn't a good decision to make that call. Next time, I'm gonna put it in your memos, and next time you call me back trying to double dip on that again, I'm gonna remind you that I don't really like the fact you did that.
Yeah, and that kind of kills off your relationship.
Yeah.
I mean,
you're gonna immediately burn the bridge if you tell someone, yeah, I'll comp the 3 nights, and then they absolutely no play you, and it's just like, okay, cool. Like, now you're actually gonna pay $1,000, and they weren't ready for that, so now they're automatically gonna hate you.
And there's a difference, isn't there? I mean, we're talking about someone here who's going to maybe take the comp and not play at all. But you could get someone who takes the comp and just has a really bad first 3 days in Vegas, loses a load of money, and comes with half the money they expect to come with, and just low plays. And there's a difference.
Yeah, well, and you never know what the outside variables are, too. Like, maybe they tripped over a curb while they were walking or something like that, and they had to spend a day in bed just getting over, like, a muscle strain, or I don't know, something, right?
Yeah.
Or any number of things can happen, and I find a lot of it in the host business comes down to how you treat people when you know it's going to be either a low play or a no play trip, because it's easy enough for you to say, and that's the relationship component of it too. Like, if you know your individual well enough, you'll know that they're not just going to stiff you this time just because they're not playing. Like, what if they're coming for a business meeting and they just happen to stay with you a little bit because that's their spot, and they're going to play like one day, but they got meetings the whole rest of the time, or they got conventions, or they're in town for a friend's wedding or something like that. Like, people get married here, so that comes into it a lot too. And if you're immediately gonna feel like you burnt the bridge with your own individual just because they low played you on their friend's wedding trip or something, or a bachelor party, not taking into account that the next time out they fully plan on going back to their usual level of play. I think that's a lot of the relationship aspect, and I'm not sure every host latches onto that.
Yeah, and presumably you might have a player who might say to you, "Look, I'm coming out. I'm going to be in business meetings. I really need a room. You know, I'm always good for it. Can you help me out this trip?"
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the times too, it's like a room I'm always willing to do. If you're qualified for a room, I'll get you a room, even if you're probably not going to play as much as normal. Maybe we don't. Maybe we talk like not a suite this time or something.
Yeah, yeah,
But a lot of times when you have that relationship with players too, like they're willing to negotiate a little bit on their overall offers. So like, look, like I'm not going to play as much this time. Like, maybe we save my free play for next time, or like, yeah, I get maybe we shouldn't do a suite this time. I just need a regular room, or I need to impress clients. I need a suite. But I also
yeah.
understand if that then means I shouldn't get some food and beverage as a result because, like I said, I'm not going to be playing or something.
Yeah, and presumably as well, it goes back to this whole we were talking about before, this building a relationship, knowing your player, the player having a good relationship with you, knowing the host, and that kind of thing. Give and take.
Yeah, give and take. It's a lot of just having a relationship. Like it's like any other relationship, a friendship, a marriage, whatever. You got to know the person that you're in business with, that
Yeah.
you're in the relationship with, and when you do, it makes it a lot easier. You know what to expect. You know what you can afford to give and take. It's the same thing with business.
So I'm interested to know though what that would do to someone's generated offers, because if you come in and you stay for 3 days, play for one, and you only play on one day, does that not hurt your offers?
Yeah, in the era of database, yeah, it would definitely affect
Yeah.
what your mailer offers are, because that's based off of I mean everywhere sets their own window of time, but X
Yeah.
amount of months, and it's your average trip that we can expect or average day that we can expect out of it.
Yeah.
It's gonna impact your offers in one way or another. But at the same time, it is still an average. So if you regularly play a lot, like the last 5 trips you came on that window, and then you
Yeah.
have one that's not that good, it may not drag it down to the point where you're really going to notice anything. But yeah, I mean, like that at that point, you're talking a complete black and white area. There's no gray area when it comes to the numbers. It's just if the window is 251 ADT to 349 or whatever, and you fall below it, you're out of it. It
But
could be
presumably,
by 1 cent, but you're still below the line as far as the computer is concerned.
but presumably that's probably actually more going to affect your player that doesn't quite qualify for a host, because you would be able to overlook that almost.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the benefits of having a host is I can look at your overall and just be like, okay, well, this person's worth investing based off of their usual trip, not based off of their overall average, and that
And
gives you a little bit more of the human element.
and would you guys look at an overall trip, or would you look on it on a day by day basis?
It really just depends. Like
Okay.
locals, we look on like a monthly basis because especially a local, like sometimes you're just gonna want to stop by the bar and just hang out after work and relax a little bit. Maybe you're gonna put $100 in a poker machine and that's about it. Whereas
Yeah.
other times, like you really feel like going to gamble, and you could be like a 5K player that day or something. In either direction, hopefully you win. But like we refer to them as like what your lost potential could be, or like what kind of bankroll you might be bringing that you could realistically use. Because we said earlier in the podcast, like you could have somebody who sits down next to you on a table, buys in $10,000, but he's only ever going to lose 1,000. He's not a $10,000 player. He just has $10,000. Like good for you.
Yeah. Because I think that's the interesting thing when you, especially reading online and looking at properties. I think Caesars look at your day. So if you go to Caesars and you put your card in and you just or go and just redeem your diamond drinks or whatever, that triggers a gaming day and that can affect your offers.
Yeah, or sometimes you just park there and that triggers a day too.
Yeah.
I guess I can't say I'm 100% up to how that works on individual properties, but I know that there are some that's the case, where if you just use your player's card to get free parking, it's like, okay, cool, like hopefully you play today.
Yeah, interesting. Because I always think that's quite harsh, but maybe it just has to be that way because otherwise it gets abused. I don't know.
Well, I mean, because locals have to pay for parking now too. Although it's
Yeah.
at least since the pandemic, it changed it around a little bit. Like there's sometimes more of a grace period. Like you can park for free for a couple hours or something. Like depending on where you're at, like at least enough time to go grab dinner or something. Or maybe it's easier to get validated these days. But if you just knew somebody who is 7-star or something and just took their card, like you could just have some local guy who just always parks at Caesar's Palace now just because he feels like it.
Yeah.
So they're probably trying to crack down on that a little bit because they don't want you just to have a parking spot there forever.
Yeah, and then go and play somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right, so let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, I want a casino host. How do you get one? Do you approach a host, or does a host approach you? Does a host find you?
Typically, I would say a host finds you,
Hmm.
because a lot of them will get, like, after your trip, they'll get databases and stuff sent out. Like, here's a list of people who may have warranted a host based off of their play this week, and then all their contact information, they'll probably reach out to you by, I would say email now is probably more likely. They might text you. Sometimes it's a letter, because depending on where you enroll for the player's card, if it's just the blackjack pit or something like that, they may not even get anything other than just the info off your ID. So that's why you'll get a
Interesting.
lot of letters sometimes. Because what if you never gave up your email? Now we don't know how to contact you by email. I'm just going to send you a letter, and maybe sometimes I'll handwrite it too. It'll be fancy that way. But other ways, I mean, you should never feel afraid to talk to a host individually. Like, you could ask the players club if there's any hosts around or something. Sometimes you can get phone numbers or emails, or some
Yeah.
people will find you on LinkedIn, I guess. You can talk to them ahead of time, but I would say, at least to temper your expectations, it's like, it helps if you know what your value is to a casino. Like, you've dealt with hosts in the past and you're just looking at switching properties for a trip or something,
Yeah.
or if you're just looking to build a relationship with a host, that's fair too. But at that point, you likely don't qualify for a lot of things that a host can do if you've never dealt with one before. So you can't really go into it having talked to people who, like, oh, our host gets us concert tickets, the best table at the steakhouse on New Year's Eve at a moment's notice or whatever. Like, these are all things we can do, but they're for people who are worth that. Like, they have that value established already. And if you don't have a host yet, you can talk to one. Like, they'll be honest with you. I mean, it's possible they're just gonna help you book your offers, and in which case maybe you should still talk to reservations unless you
Yeah.
need the personal aspect, because, like, it's just gonna take me longer to get back to you if I'm booking your offer. It's as simple as that. Like, I have a life, and I have
Yeah.
people I have to prioritize too at that point. So it's not that I would refuse to help anybody who is just booking a regular offer or something, that and I'm just responding back saying, I'm sorry, those days are blacked out, blah blah blah. That's fine, but it's just, if you call general reservations or VIP services, you're gonna get the answer now. Whereas me, it's like, okay, I might have just left when you sent that, so I'm back in the office tomorrow morning. I can respond back. Now I'm waiting for your email and stuff like that. So it just changes it helps to temper your expectations, I think.
And could you like say would you get or do you have the ability, for instance, to get pinged if someone is playing big at a certain machine? Would you approach a player at a machine, or does it generally happen after a trip?
It would generally happen after a trip, just because we're usually tied up with stuff. Although we do have, like, applications and stuff. We wouldn't really get a ping for a slot machine per se. I
Okay.
know some places have a database system that alerts them if their individual client is in action on slots.
Yeah.
But a lot of them have, like ours, we have this map that is basically a blueprint of every slot machine. You can click on it, and if the person has the player's card in there, it'll tell you who it is. You can see which
Interesting.
machine it is. You can see how long they've been on that machine. Sometimes you can even see if it's their birthday, etc. Or if their anniversary of signing up for a player's card or something. I don't know. Maybe that's something people are interested in celebrating. But you can tell them that way. It's a little bit easier on table games, because, like, the casino shift manager will just send a group text to host if it's somebody who's not hosted, who just signed up for a card or is refusing signing up for a card because they figure maybe we might be able to convince them that it's a good idea. Um, that kind of thing. Table players could be a little bit harder sometimes on determining whether or not they even want a card, because sometimes they just purely drop in and they're like, oh, well, I'm just gonna throw $1,000 anyways and then leave, so they don't necessarily need to be tracked. I
Yeah.
think that especially if you're a slot player, like, it's insane if you don't get a player's card, because first of all, you're not. I mean, the points aside, the tax purposes alone, which I know you in the UK don't have to deal with quite the same way as we do, but here you can write off wins against losses.
Yeah.
So from a tax perspective, why wouldn't you? Because it's a worst case scenario, it's nothing you have to worry about, or best case scenario, maybe you won a jackpot or something, and now you have a chance at writing it off instead of paying the taxes.
Yeah, and I'm sure I heard as well that most, like the majority of players, weirdly don't have a card. Like everyday players that just dropping into the casino, maybe it's their first time in Vegas, maybe they just visit every few years, and they don't use a card at all.
Yeah, I think a lot of people either decide that they're just not going to be loyal to a particular business anyway, so it doesn't really matter, and they
Yeah.
just figure maybe it's negligible the amount of back end comps they might get just based on their play. I mean, you're going to get something, so Like there's always a benefit. Even if you play like $40, you might get $1 in comp dollars that you can just take off of something. I don't know. It's $1 less now. That's
Yeah.
cool. So
All right.
it's yeah.
All right. So I feel like anytime anyone speaks to a host in any way like this, they ask this question. So I'm going to ask you, and I don't know if you will have a story, but what is the craziest um, thing you've seen in your time as a host?
Yeah, I mean, we get asked that a lot, and ironically, there's never anything that's just like completely pops to my mind, just because. And I think a lot of it came to the point of like just our job. We are just so used to dealing with random stuff on a day to day basis.
Yeah.
Like it's just always something different that almost the surprising stuff just never really surprises you. Like, I mean, the average person could just be surprised that I'm sitting here watching a blackjack game where a guy's betting $50,000 a hand, and the average person is going to be like, "That's unreal. Like that's already insane as it is." Like some guy who can lose half a stick in a day or something like that, like yeah, that's unreal. But then there's stories for me. Like I had this one guy that I was sitting down on a table with him, and he went to color up, like to cash out his money on the game, and the
Mm.
pit boss said, "All right, we got one quitter over here," and I like you could just see the look in his eye just snap, and he looks at him and says, "What'd you call me?" And he's just like, "Oh, I was just messing with you. You know, you're calling it a night." And he's just like, "No, give me the chips back." And he went on the most unreal run I have ever seen. Like, I don't think he lost a single hand for like an hour. And it was just, he just like went on this massive heater. And to cap it all off, we're walking to the cage together afterwards, just talking about it. He's just like, "You know what? I'm gonna throw down." He's like, "I'm not a roulette guy, but I'm gonna throw $100 down on just whatever number it was his favorite number at the time." And naturally,
Please
as you
tell
can
me
tell,
he won.
it hits straight up. It's just one
Oh
of those
my
nights
god.
like I'm looking at it like like what?
Never has that ever happened for me. Like that random, like, oh, I'm just gonna. These people sometimes have this thing where they're like, as soon as I get into Vegas, I put $25 on my lucky number and see if it hits. Never ever do I get that kind of luck.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to think like one in every 36 times, or
Yeah.
maybe 37 if you're on the wrong strip table. Uh, you got a shot.
All right, so well, sort of bringing this to a little bit of a close, but you've obviously been a host for quite a long time now, where you are. What's the best thing about coming downtown versus the Strip? Would you say for the
I
players, those people that are out there who maybe are hosted on the Strip? Why should they be thinking give downtown a go?
honestly, I just give the same reason as what got me working down here. I came from the strip. I was dead set on like, oh, these are the spots. Like, this is the prestige and everything. But
Yeah,
the thing with the strip is it's not reality for a lot of people. And some people like that. Like it gives you the chance to be whoever you want to be, right? Like everyone always says that about Las Vegas. Whereas Fremont Street's a lot more realistic. Like it's just life down here. And I think that more to necessarily the destination, like we have fun down here too. Like it's all stuff right across from each other. But a lot of people need to realize too, from a play standpoint, that more important than interacting with a host or getting what you think is fair, you got to figure out where you're the best player too. Like you want to be in the right pond. You don't necessarily need to
yeah,
be like a whale or anything, but there's a lot of people who, for example, they'll go to a place like the Win or Palazzo or something like that, and just get comped rooms and maybe like $100 food and beverage credit. And to some people, that's exciting. And if that's your goal, just to be able to tell all your friends, "Yeah, I'm comped at Win," then cool, you got your goal. But if you're trying to really maximize what your level of play is, maybe you're a 25K player at Bellagio, which like any convention, they get those just walking in hand over fist. You'll be hosted, you'll get treated well, but the thing is, if you're a 25K player at Golden Nugget or at Plaza or something like that, like you're getting stuff. You're probably
yeah,
getting one of the better suites. You might get invites to like hockey games or whatever, or stuff they have tickets for. Whereas like if you're a 25K player at an MGM property or like on the strip or some average place or some bigger place, you're just a guy, and they'll give you some stuff sometimes, but it's like it's gonna be space available tickets. Like okay, we got you a ticket to this concert, but we can't guarantee where it's gonna be because then they're gonna sort it out based on other people, and it turns out you're in like the only row behind you is the wall, but at least you're there. So it a lot of it too is managing where you'd be the best fit.
yeah. So you kind of want to be the big fish in the right pond, so to speak, rather
Yeah,
than a small fish in a big pond.
or just be in the right pond, I guess. It doesn't necessarily matter the size of fish you are, but figuring out which pond you're supposed to be in. Maybe that's a goldfish bowl. Who knows? I don't know.
I feel like that's the quote of this episode. We've started talking about ponds and fish and where you fit best.
Yeah, I mean, things people can expect out of the Lights and Dice podcast are the sizes of ponds. You tuned in trying to hear more about the gaming industry and travel industry, and you're hearing about the size of like lakes and ponds. So goldfish bowls, the ideal place to put your pet fish.
We like to appeal to all audiences.
Yeah, well, we're really a podcast for all.
All right, well, Chris, this has been a really good insight. I think it's really useful. I think people are going to find this really useful in terms of thinking about their play, even if like Chris alluded to earlier, if you're not a player that's hosted, but thinking about how to get the best sort of bang for your buck, so to speak, in terms of comps. So thank you very much for pulling back the curtain, so to speak, on the world of casino hosts.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm excited to get our pod going here, and I'm happy to be our first. Maybe I used too much emphasis on the special guest, but it was an easy enough one, and I look forward to moving forward and maybe pulling back more curtains, talking about more different various sized bodies of water,
and fish.
Fish. Everyone likes fish.
Hey, I don't like any fish that's on a slot machine. Those damn machines and those damn pigs and stuff. Anyway, but that's another topic for another day.
Yeah, there's more puff in that topic.
All right. Well, we've got plenty to talk about in future episodes. So hopefully, everyone listening out there has enjoyed this first episode. I think it would be fair to say we're just going with how we feel at this point in time. If anyone does have any feedback or any questions, or they just want to hurl abuse at us, you can find us on X, I guess it is now. It's not Twitter anymore, is it?
I refuse. It's always Twitter to me.
Well, this is the thing, because I'm always like, am I tweeting? Is it tweeting anymore, or is it?
Well, didn't they say it was like a Zeet or like X?
Oh, yeah, that to me that's just I don't know. It doesn't feel right. So if you want to give us a follow,
we're there. Yeah.
Yeah, we're there. If you want to give us a follow, please do. We are at Lights and Dice on X. You can also, if you prefer, drop us an email, studio@lightsanddice.com. Please feel free. If you want to connect with us, it'd be great to hear from you. Chris, do you want to plug your own Twitter?
Sure. Yeah, I'm at ChrisWaterman17. I'm on Twitter. I have Instagram at This Is Chris Waterman. That's pretty much where you can find me. What about yourself?
You can find me on X as well at Las Vegas UK. That's really the main place now. I can't be dealing with all these different social medias. I know you're doing the Instagram stuff and all that kind of thing. I think we're going to do an Instagram for this though, right? So maybe you can be in charge of that. We'll see. But because they got Blue Sky now and stuff too, right? I don't know. I'm not up with all the socials, but please give us a follow.
We'll need our own social media director at some point now.
Yeah, exactly. Please give us a follow. And if you like this episode, give it a little review or whatever, wherever you're listening. Leave us some feedback. We're all about the constructive feedback.
That's true.
All right,
Chris, be nice. Nice stuff.
Don't be too harsh on us the first time around.
Yeah, I don't want to get blasted on Twitter now just because, oh, hey, Chris.
Yeah, or everyone suddenly now will be contacting you saying, "I think I've qualified for a casino host." You're going to get
can I double up? Can I double up my New Year's offer 3 days after it happened or something? Yeah.
Sure. All right, well. Chris, is there anything else that you want to say before we finish?
I don't think so. I'm just excited we're getting this rolling, and I look forward to one of the ones we have coming up next.
Yeah, I would love to give you a preview of what we have yet to come, but we kind of don't really have a plan for this. We're going to try and do episodes as regularly as we possibly can, but I kind of also don't want to just do an episode for the sake of it. We want to make sure we have something really interesting for everyone out there to listen to. I like this. I think this has been really interesting. So hopefully we'll have some cool topics coming up soon.
Yeah, and for those of you listening in, we immediately touched on casino hosting and gaming aspects, but we do look forward to diving into the world of, should you deal with a travel agent? Spoiler alert, maybe not. Airline miles, stuff like retail stuff, like shows, how should you treat your bartender, stuff like that. Like we're not all just looking at it from a gaming standpoint. It's more from a hospitality and an environment industry standpoint. So you don't need to necessarily get turned off by all the gaming if you're more of a, I just show up and stay in my suite and go to Cirque du Soleil shows. So
Yeah, we 100% need to do an episode where we talk about, or I talk about, all the mistakes I made from my first Vegas trip, such as booking through Expedia. But that's a whole story for another day, and we'll pretend I didn't do that.
yeah, well, maybe it's a good thing you did. Sometimes you got to learn from the mistakes, right?
Yeah, that's true. All right, Chris, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. And we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Yes, we do.